7:34 p.m. on the 2nd of June 2016, a 999 call was made to Surrey Police by a small child saying their mother had hurt them and their father. Police rushed to a property in Wimborne Avenue in the town of Redhill and were confronted with the scene of horror. Lying on the kitchen floor was 38-year-old Dawn Rhodes. Her throat had been cut to the point where she was almost decapitated. The child who called 999 had a large wound to their arm, and Dawn's husband, Robert Rhodes, had knife marks in his back, as well as head injuries, and was inconsolable. He told police that Dawn had attacked both him and their child, and in order to save their lives, he'd had to kill his wife. The only problem is, it was all a lie. Rhodes had murdered his wife in cold blood, but even worse, he'd manipulated their child, who was under 10 years old, into helping him, with them setting up the moment when Dawn's throat was cut, and afterwards being sworn to silence by their own father, who told them, quote, "Snitches get stitches." This is a case of a truly evil, despicable man who almost escaped justice. Welcome to Evil Among Us. This will be a shorter video than usual. I know I say that a lot and then get carried away, but this will be true for this one, as there's no information currently available about the background of the main subject of our case, Robert Rhodes. Instead, the focus in the press with Rhodes, who was born on the 20th of June 1972, has been on the period from 2016 until the present day, but we need to go back to the late 90s when Robert Rhodes was working as a driver for a well-known DJ. One night, he was in a London pub having a pint before a gig when he struck up a conversation with a woman called Dawn Spencer, who was of a similar age to him. She liked heavy metal music, and after he managed to get her free tickets for an upcoming show, they began dating. The pair married in 2003, and by the mid-2000s they had moved into 16 Wimborne Avenue in the town of Redhill in Surrey, which is directly south of Croydon and is part of the London commuter belt. Sometime after 2006, Dawn gave birth to their first child. This child is important to the case moving forward, as we'll cover shortly, and understandably, their identity has been withheld by the courts, including their age, name and gender, as they're still today a child. They've been referred to as Child X, or simply X in news reports and in court proceedings, but I believe, as I've said before, that it's important to humanise the victims in these cases. So I'm going to call this child Jack moving forward, as I think calling them by a single letter diminishes the fact that this is a real child who's out there somewhere today, trying to put their life back together due to the evil actions of their father. Becoming a parent completed Dawn, as her mother Elizabeth later said, quote, "Dawn was a loving daughter, sister and mother. Being a mother was what brought joy to Dawn. She always wanted to be a mother and was delighted to be one. Dawn was caring, capable and strong. She would do anything for anyone and was loved by both friends and family. Dawn was an organiser and very much a people person. She would organise local charity events to include the community and her colleagues where she worked at the Raven Housing Trust. She would always be involved in the organisation of work social events, especially around Christmas time. Dawn was loved by all her peers." This was, by all accounts, not a happy marriage. Several articles have mentioned that Dawn was the victim of coercive controlling behaviour by her husband for years, although no specific details have been provided. In the subsequent court case, witnesses testified that Dawn, towards the end of her life, has spoken to her friends about how controlling Rhodes was. I have no doubt this is true, given how selfish, self-absorbed and manipulative Robert Rhodes would prove himself to be, all the common traits of a domestic abuser. By the middle of 2015, after 12 years of marriage, Dawn was tired of her husband's behaviour and she wanted a divorce, but he was refusing to separate. The pair were living separate lives, and on Christmas Eve 2015, Dawn told her husband that she'd begun a new relationship and that the marriage was over. This was like a red rag to a bull, and so Robert Rhodes began a campaign of stalking Dawn and then planning her murder, coercing their young child into helping him. From Christmas Eve 2015, Robert Rhodes was glued to his computer, and he was conducting repeated searches showing that he was clearly not going to let Dawn go. Specifically, he was looking at each and every way to monitor her communications. He researched, amongst other things, how to track a mobile phone, how to read WhatsApp messages, how to unlock and clone a mobile phone, how to hack a Facebook account and bypass passwords on a laptop or tablet, how to delete the user log on a computer, and how to send an anonymous text from a different number. Rhodes researched Dawn's new partner, who it seems was still married. He then set up a fake Facebook profile and reached out to the wife. He then met up with her, using a false name, and lied about the level of intimacy he'd seen between Dawn and her husband, trying to manipulate this woman for his own ends. He also asked work colleagues whether they knew anyone who would give Dawn's new partner, quote, a slap, which he clarified in court was him asking this question because, quote, I was looking for someone big and scary to make him want to leave my wife alone. However, it's clear that by the 19th of January 2016, Robert Rhodes was clearly having fantasies about killing Dawn. Between this date and the 13th of March 2016, he conducted a number of searches indicating how much he was spiralling and how dangerous he was becoming. These searches included researching poisons, including those which would kill instantly, as well as ways to obtain lethal drugs. He also typed in phrases such as, quote, vengeance is mine. The pair argued constantly, and by March 2016, Dawn moved out of the family home, leaving Rhodes and Jack in the property. This led to an escalation in Rhodes' behaviour. He was obsessed with finding out information about where his wife was and about her new partner, clearly looking for a way to manipulate the situation to destroy their relationship so she would return to him. His searches about ways to commit murder also continued. But like a typical domestic abuser, Robert Rhodes was a hypocrite. In March 2016, whilst obsessing over his wife moving on, he was doing the same thing, and he began a relationship with a woman he met online. This was something it appears Dawn knew about, and contrary to Rhodes' later claim, didn't care about, aside from saying this woman shouldn't stay in the house and be around Jack. Rhodes ignored this. This was noticeably to annoy Dawn and likely to make her jealous. Dawn would regularly be at the home seeing Jack, but she would avoid Rhodes, whom by this point she couldn't stand. Jack was of course angry and distressed by the absence of his mother. He was less than 10 years old, and so simply missed his mother and didn't understand what was going on. Rhodes tapped into this. He began manipulating his child in order to force contact with Dawn. He would instruct Jack to send her messages, asking to meet up, because when he did this, she would turn him down flat. It's clear that by the 29th of May 2016, Robert Rhodes had decided to kill his wife, and that he would draw his son into his despicable plan. Beginning on or around the 30th of May 2016, Rhodes had a number of conversations with Jack, who, to reiterate, was less than 10 years old. He played on his anger and upset about the absence of his mother. Rhodes asked his son, quote, do you want to get rid of Mummy? Jack was promised a trip to Cornwall if he helped his father dispose of Dawn. In the days leading up to the murder, Rhodes would coach his son on the plan and their cover story. He decided to cut Dawn's throat and told Jack that when he gave him the nod, he was to tell his mother to close her eyes and hold out her hands because he had a drawing that he wanted her to see. He was then to leave the room. Rhodes would come in, and then he would get rid of Dawn. Jack was forced to repeat this plan over and over again. More importantly, the self-defense claim, which was central to his father getting away with murder. With his plan in place and his child accomplice, Robert Rhodes set out to kill Dawn. At around 6 p.m. on Thursday the 2nd of June 2016, Dawn Rhodes arrived at the family home on Wimborne Avenue. This was a pre-arranged visit organised by her estranged husband, Robert Rhodes, in order to kill her, but ostensibly, Dawn was there to see Jack. Jack had been out on a day trip with Elizabeth Spencer, Dawn's mother, who dropped him back at around the same time that she got there. Elizabeth would later comment that she thought that Rhodes was acting strangely. He seemed jumpy, or as she put it later, quote, like a cat on a hot tin roof. This was later determined to be due to the fact that Rhodes had taken cocaine, likely to give himself Dutch courage to go through with his plan. Dawn, by this point, could not stand to be around her husband, and so the visit was a short one. She was expected by a new partner at his home at around 7 or 8 p.m, but he would never see her alive again. Less than half an hour after going to see her son, Dawn would be dead. Whilst Dawn was in the kitchen, Rhodes gave his son a nod, and he followed what his father had told him to do. Jack entered the kitchen where his mother was sitting, and he said, quote, "I drew a picture for you. Close your eyes and hold out your hands." Dawn did as she was told. Jack then left the room and went upstairs, being told to wait there by his father. Rhodes then walked in, kitchen knife in hand, where he stood behind Dawn before grabbing her by the hair, yanking her head back and cutting her throat. The wound, as later described in court, was horrific, extending almost ear to ear. It was delivered with considerable force, to the point where it missed Dawn's spinal column by just a few millimetres. Arterial spray was observed on both the floor and up the walls. Dawn then slumped to the floor, unable to speak, as she bled to death in minutes. Jack didn't see the murder, but he heard it, with him later reporting, quote, "I heard a gurgling noise, and I heard her hit the floor." With Dawn dead, Rhodes summoned his son into the room. He had not witnessed the death of his mother, but was now forced to look at her corpse, and his father covered in blood. Rhodes then began setting the scene. He bashed his head against the wall to create the impression that he'd been attacked. He then asked his son for a, quote, "favour," and told him to stab him in the back. Placing the knife in his son's hands, he turned around, and Jack did what he was instructed, but these wounds were superficial, unsurprisingly, as they were made by a small child. Then, as if to reinforce how evil this monster is, Robert Rhodes took the knife, which he just used to kill Dawn, and used it to cut his son's arm. This was a deep wound, which, as we'll get to, would leave scarring on Jack for the rest of his life. At 7:34 p.m, Rhodes enacted the next part of his plan. He dialed 999 and put Jack on the phone, who had already been told exactly what to say. He said that his mummy had hurt him and his daddy. Rhodes then took the phone, and whilst bawling and crying, said, quote, "My wife has attacked me." The operator told him to take their son and barricade themselves in the bathroom. Clearly to add a bit of dramatic flair, Rhodes deliberately didn't answer some of the questions he was being asked, and the line dropped out, leading the operator to believe the attack was ongoing and that help was needed immediately. Rhodes then took Jack, and as they'd been told, barricaded themselves in the bathroom, and they soon heard the front door being broken in as the first officers on the scene arrived. They stepped into a scene of horror. Dawn's body lay on the kitchen floor. The horrific wound to her neck was evident, as well as the fact that she was clearly dead. Officers went upstairs to find an almost hysterical Robert Rhodes and Jack in the bathroom, with the latter clutching his arm, which was dripping with blood. Both were taken to hospital to receive treatment. It's clear the police were not buying any of this, and on the same day as Dawn was found dead, Rhodes was arrested on suspicion of her murder. He was interviewed, and he spun his lies, as shown by this disgusting footage. I do need to state that whilst I've named the child in this case, their real name is bleeped out in this footage, just to avoid any confusion.
She grabbed hold of it and she swung the arm, I suppose. He was pushing her.
Okay. So door were close at this
They were
stage?
pretty close, yeah. I mean, they were within arm's length.
Okay.
Kind of thing. She was like kind of just swung.
You're sort of indicating a downward motion?
Yeah, just, yeah.
Okay.
She went like both the handle, so she had it like that.
Okay.
She just, and then I jumped straight in and grabbed hold of
Yeah,
the blade.
Okay.
And I didn't want to let go of it because I didn't want to hurt me anymore and I didn't want to hurt. So I held as tight as I could and shoved her away and she let go. And then I took it out of my hand because my hand hurt. She come back at me again and she was really angry. And I swung because I wanted her to stop.
Okay. And describe how you swung.
I just,
Okay.
Jack was also interviewed twice by a specially trained officer and broadly gave a similar account to his father, claiming that Dawn had attacked them both. However, there were strange things he said which were picked up on. This included Jack saying, quote, "Only me and Dad know the truth." When asked what he meant by this, he said, "I'm not completely sure. I have half of it, and Dad has half of it, because I was upstairs half the time. The main truth is that Mum, she hurt us, she hurt Dad, she died." At one point, the detective left, and as if to reinforce just how young this child was, Jack was giggling and hiding behind a chair, waiting for the detective to come back into the room so he could jump out and scare them. He also complained about the fact he was given maths homework by school. During this time, whilst he was on his own, Jack looked up to the camera in the room, smiled, and put his finger to his lips. The pathologist's findings were key, with them determining that Dawn had been killed by a single, forceful knife slash across her throat, most likely delivered from behind. This directly contradicted Rhodes' account of self-defence. And so, on the 5th of June 2016, 3 days after Dawn's death, Robert Rhodes was charged with her murder. He appeared the next day at Redhill Magistrates Court and was remanded into custody. Now I've looked back at old news reports to gather as much information about the original court proceedings, but there's something that is shocking which I simply can't explain. Specifically, in the month between the first appearance in Magistrates Court and when he appeared at the Old Bailey in London on the 5th of July 2016, where he formally entered his not guilty pleas, he was bailed. I had to read multiple articles from the time to check this wasn't a misprint, because bail in a murder case in the UK is almost unheard of, especially with a death this savage. I cannot find what the rationale was for this, but the court would have had to have been satisfied that Robert Rhodes, an alleged killer, posed no risk to the community, which is a completely contradictory statement. But apparently he was extremely lucky, or his legal team were exceptional, or both. This decision would set the tone for further outrageous decisions made in court, but in the short term, whilst awaiting the trial for the murder of his wife, Rhodes was walking free, and he was soon back manipulating his child, twisting the mind of his own blood to avoid taking responsibility for his evil actions. Whilst awaiting trial for the murder of Dawn Rhodes, Robert Rhodes was granted supervised contact with Jack in a contact centre. During this time, Rhodes was dripping poison into his son's ear, who, I need to remind you again, was less than 10 years old at this point and had just lost his mother. Rhodes reinforced to Jack that what had happened was, quote, our plan, and told him to stick to the story they'd agreed. Rhodes got his son to rehearse the narrative over and over again. When Rhodes was at his mother's house, he would hide a mobile phone, which Jack would find when he visited his grandmother. On this, he would leave messages for his son, reminding him about their agreement. Rhodes emotionally manipulated his son, using fear of harm, but also fear of abandonment, to bend him to his will. This included use of veiled threats, telling Jack, quote, snitches get stitches. With regards to abandonment, Rhodes told Jack that if he didn't convey his story convincingly, then Daddy would go to prison. As he would later recall, quote, I was made to feel like, if that were to happen, it would be all my fault, and I'd lose my mum and dad over the same event. Robert Rhodes' first murder trial began at the Old Bailey on the 12th of December 2016, but just 3 days later it collapsed. Reports from the time state this was due simply to, quote, legal reasons, with no further information available. In May 2017, trial number 2 began, again at the Old Bailey in London. On the stand, Rhodes spun his lies. He admitted that he found out his wife was with another man and that he'd used a fake Facebook profile to contact this man's wife in order to inform her about the affair, but he stated this was purely on a moral basis. He was at peace with the fact the marriage was at an end. 2 days before her death, Rhodes claimed that Dawn had found out that he'd met a woman on a dating website. She was apoplectic, and on the date of her death, she confronted Rhodes and, quote, flipped like the Hulk, grabbed a knife, slashed Jack's arm, and attempted to stab him in the back. In order to save them both, he swung with the knife, cutting his wife's throat inadvertently, killing her. During the course of the trial, Jack's 2 police interviews were played, backing up his evil father's account. Reports on the original trial are scant, but it appears the prosecution argued that the wound to Dawn's neck was clearly inflicted from behind, making the idea of self-defence ridiculous. However, the defence was able to put doubt in the jury's mind, with their case being that a frontal assault was one potential scenario, and therefore Rhodes' claims were plausible. Bizarrely, it doesn't appear that any of the evidence about Rhodes' internet search history showing clear premeditation appears to have been entered into evidence. As a result, after 36 hours of deliberation, on the 30th of May 2017, Robert Rhodes was found not guilty of murder by a majority of 10-2. This decision is sickening, not only because Rhodes got away with killing his wife, but the verdict essentially confirmed his lies about Dawn, portraying her not as a loving mother, but as an unhinged, unstable monster who had tried to kill her own child. On the same day, Rhodes left the court a free man. Robert Rhodes' neighbours were shocked when he returned home. They were sure he would be convicted. They described that he came back with a swagger. He was untouchable. In December 2017, Robert Rhodes began a relationship with a woman called Megan Baldwin, a woman 20 years younger than him, who, as it turned out, was a babysitter for Jack from 2015 up until the time of Dawn's death. She then moved into the family home, the place where Dawn had been murdered. In 2019, Rhodes decided to propose to Megan, but rather than doing this himself, he got Jack to do this. He later said that he did this, quote, to try to make them feel included, so that Jack would accept Megan as his new mother. I mean, how sick is this? Again, this is peak manipulation, getting the child that he coerced into murdering his own mother to tug on the heartstrings of the next potential victim. In 2020, Robert Rhodes sold up the home in Redhill for £470,000 and moved 200 miles to a secluded rundown cottage in the remote parish of Redhill in Devon, where he began working as a self-employed carpenter. He clearly thought he'd gotten away with murder, and he would have done had it not been for two factors. Firstly, before 2005, a person could not be tried for a crime for which had already been acquitted. This was known as double jeopardy, but after a relentless 17-year campaign by a woman called Anne Ming, the law was changed. In November 1989, Anne's daughter Julie Hogg was murdered by William Dunlop, who hid her body behind the paddle of the bath in their home, where it remained for 2 months. Despite clear evidence of his guilt, he was acquitted of murder. While serving a separate 7-year sentence for battering a love rival, he admitted, even bragged about the murder to a prison officer in 1999, believing he was beyond the reach of the law. After the law was changed, Dunlop was retried for the murder of Julie, found guilty, and in 2007 sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 17 years. However, the change in the law meant that an individual could only be retried if there was compelling new evidence, so the police needed a breakthrough in the case. This came in 2021 when Jack, whose life had been destroyed by the actions of his father, decided to speak up, and this would set in motion a sequence of events which would lead to the evil of Robert Rhodes finally being exposed. Jack, after the death of his mother, did not return to live with his father, instead stayed with his paternal uncle and his wife, who became his legal guardians in September 2018. Robert Rhodes would reach out occasionally, taking his son on days out and showering him with gifts, all to buy this child's silence. However, during the pandemic, the visits stopped and father and son had a falling out. This gave Jack time to think, and the floodgates opened. The guilt and horror of realising that he'd been manipulated by his own father into being involved in the killing of his mother and covering up this crime meant that his mental health completely fell apart. In November 2021, Jack, who as a reminder was still a child no older than 15 years old, finally opened up to a psychologist who was treating him for PTSD. He told this professional everything, with him later stating, quote, "I just didn't want to lie anymore. It had just made me feel so awful for so long, and I just wanted it to be done." The psychologist immediately called the police, and this led to the investigation into the death of Dawn Rhodes being reopened. In January 2022, Jack was interviewed by detectives, and during a 4-hour interview he told them everything. The manipulation before and after the killing, as well as what actually happened to Dawn Rhodes. As opposed to the child who was smiling and hiding behind chairs, trying to scare the detectives, this time Jack was extremely distressed, rocking backwards and forwards and hyperventilating. He was a child whose life had been completely destroyed. He told the detectives, quote, "From what I have heard and read about, once you do something bad, it is so much easier to do it again once you have done it the first time. I don't want him to do it again. I don't want him to hurt anyone. I wanted Dad to get arrested and actually punished for what he has done." There are a number of oddities in this case, things that happened which allowed a dangerous killer to remain on the streets, and this included the fact that the reinvestigation into the death of Dawn Rhodes lasted for 2 years, and it wasn't until June 2024 that Robert Rhodes was arrested for the second time for her murder. As you can hear, in this unfortunately out of focus body-worn camera footage.
Robert, the time is 8:44.
Yeah.
All right. I'm arrested on suspicion of murder of Dawn Rhodes on the 2nd of June 2016. This is a re-arrest of an offence for which you were charged and acquitted in court in 2017. All right. We have the power to arrest you on suspicion of this murder from the Director of Public Prosecutions, who has given his consent to reinvestigate the murder on the double jeopardy provision.
After being arrested, Rhodes said to officers, quote, "I wondered if this would come back to bite me." Now with ridiculous dyed hair and looking like a total prick as a result, Robert Rhodes was interviewed. Gone was the performance from before. This time he simply answered no comment to every question.
First question to you, in relation to this larger matter, why we're here, is tell me everything about your plan to kill your wife, Dawn Rhodes.
No comment.
Where it talks about that there was a plan to kill your wife, Dawn. From what you've seen so far, is that a true record? The plan that you had to kill your wife?
No comment.
Now, if it's not true, from what you've read so far, tell me the bits that you dispute about it.
No comment.
Because it would be helpful if you could, Robert.
No comment.
I think probably what's the most difficult thing for us to understand, and hopefully you can help us with, is why, after all these years, has come forward and said this now.
No comment.
I mean, it's a strange thing for someone to say, isn't it now? Remember. Why is that? I'm trying to get my head around it.
No comment.
Do you understand it? Sure. Do you know something that we don't?
Comment.
Because if you do, it's the time to tell us now, Robert.
No comment.
It's important not to think that Rhodes was concerned at this point. He wasn't. His mugshot shows almost a smile on his face. He'd gotten away with this once. He was no doubt confident he would do it again. He was charged with murder a second time and remanded into prison to finally face justice for killing his wife. On the 6th of October 2025, Robert Rhodes entered the dock at Inner London Crown Court for the first day of his trial. He was completely unfazed. He was smiling, laughing and chatting away with the female court officer who sat in the dock with him. As well as the murder of Dawn Rhodes, he had also been charged with child cruelty for cutting Jack with a knife, as well as 2 counts of perjury, one related to lying on the stand during his first murder trial, and the other related to him giving false evidence at a hearing before the family court. The trial lasted 9 weeks, and again, Robert Rhodes gave evidence, and on the stand, he repeated the same disgusting story from the first trial 8 years before. He portrayed Dawn as an aggressive, violent and unstable woman who'd beaten him in the past and who didn't care about the welfare of Jack at all. He was asked, quote, "Do you know of a reason why your child should say they helped to kill their own mother if this is not the truth?" He simply responded, "No." The prosecution barrister also said, quote, "You were terrified at the thought that if they did, the truth of what you had done to them and their mother would emerge, weren't you? You killed your wife in cold blood, didn't you? And you recruited your little child to do it." Again, Rhodes' response was denial, but there was little emotion, almost like he felt he was ticking boxes, until again, he was acquitted of this crime. There were other little details which were raised which showed just how selfish Robert Rhodes was, including the fact that he tried to stop Jack from getting counselling, because, as the prosecution alleged, he was fearful that this child would confess what had happened. Rhodes denied this, and said that he tried to stop this as he feared Jack would be distressed, as it would, quote, "drag things up." The reality was that Rhodes never gave a shit about his child. He didn't care that he traumatised them for the rest of their life. He didn't care about getting them help. He only cared about getting away with his crimes. He also didn't care about forcing a teenager to have to testify in court again, which Jack did via video link. Jack laid everything bare. The fact that he was upset and angry with his mother because she'd left the family home, the fact that his own father had manipulated and groomed him into taking her life. He told the court exactly what had happened to Dawn the day she died, hearing her falling to the floor after her throat was cut, being slashed by his own father. He recalled the manipulation to keep his mouth shut, which had continued for years, and how his life had fallen apart when he realised what he'd done. Over the course of the trial, the court also heard from medical experts, as well as friends and family of Dawn and Robert Rhodes. This, coupled with the internet search history, clearly shifted the scales. Dawn was vindicated with every piece of evidence that was presented, and Rhodes was shown to be a controlling, violent, pathetic coward who couldn't accept that his marriage was over, and so he decided to kill his wife. On the 12th of December 2025, the jury returned their verdicts, guilty on all charges. On the 16th of January 2026, the sentencing hearing for Rhodes began before Mrs. Justice Ellen Bogan, but the dock was empty. The defence stated that, quote, he maintains his innocence in these matters and has refused to attend. This led to the judge commenting, quote, to the malignant characteristics of which his crimes speak, the defendant has now added cowardice. She decided to pass sentence in his absence. Others were not afraid, and this included Dawn's mother, sister and brother, all of whom read their victim impact statements. Their words, as well as the court proceedings, gave Dawn Rhodes her good name back, and whilst this and the fact that her killer had been brought to justice were positives, the fact is that nothing would bring Dawn back. She'd been robbed of the rest of her life by a sad little man, but also she would not get to see her child grow up. Alongside Dawn's family was Jack, who was in court to bravely confront his father one last time by reading out his own victim impact statement. In this, he refused to call Rhodes his father and instead used his full name. He bravely said, quote, I wish I could stand here and say I've moved on with my life, and the pain, manipulation and abuse Robert Rhodes subjected me to has not ruined my life, but I can't. I wish I could say that Robert Rhodes has not taken everything from me, but I can't. Once this is all over, I can begin to rebuild my life from the ruins I've been left in. On that evening, Robert Rhodes not only murdered my mother, but he took my dad from me as well. Robert Rhodes' decisions not only impacted the life that was stripped away, but the life I must now endure with the misery his actions have left me with. I struggled throughout school, both socially and academically, unable to form trusting friendships and unable to concentrate on lessons. The traumatic experience he put me through will never go away. The guilt and shame I feel will never go away. The scar Rhodes left me with when he sliced open my forearm will never go away. The judge then delivered her remarks. She referred to the child victim in this case as X, but as I've done throughout this video, I will call him Jack, just to reinforce this is a real person, and so I will substitute this name in when appropriate. She said, quote, your wicked, callous acts have had a devastating and divisive effect on Dawn's family and on your own. The victim personal statements of Dawn's mother, sister and brother spoke movingly of the warm, vibrant woman who you violently deprived of life. Evidence given in the course of your trial by Dawn's friends and colleagues painted a picture of a caring, effervescent person who had managed to find happiness with another partner following her increasing unhappiness in her relationship with you. Most significantly, Dawn was a mother. The damaging effect of your actions on Jack in particular cannot be overstated. For the rest of Jack's life, you will have to live with his involvement in Dawn's death and the family rifts to which it has inevitably given rise. Unsurprisingly, the circumstances of that death and all that followed have had a substantial and enduring impact on Jack's mental health. In the course of your trial, you depicted Dawn as a violent and volatile individual, an uncaring and indifferent mother who had embarked upon an extramarital relationship heedless of its effects upon her family. You accepted no responsibility for the unhappiness which she'd felt, her reaction to it, or the conflict in her relationship with Jack. Having taken her life, you sought also to deprive Dawn of her good name, thereby increasing the pain caused to her family. I'll play the end of the hearing when the sentence was actually passed, but will, as usual, leave a link to the full thing below. Also, just to highlight something I think is important, likely part of his motive for this crime, which I'll circle back to in the next section, where the judge mentions about a confiscation order, essentially the court applying to get money back from Rhodes, which he got after Dawn's death, from her life insurance, etc.
For the murder of Dawn Rhodes, I pass the only sentence which the law allows me to pass, being life imprisonment. You will remain in custody until the parole board decides that you are suitable to be considered for release. The shortest period of time during which you must remain in custody is 29 years and 6 months, less the number of days which you have spent remanded in custody, including in relation to the related offences charged by counts 2 and 3. I have been told that, as at today's date, that period is agreed as being 590 days. Therefore, the minimum term which I impose in your case is 27 years and 321 days. I remind you that there is no guarantee that you will in fact be released at the end of that period or at any later time, and that if and when you are released, you will remain subject to licence for the rest of your life and may be recalled to continue your life sentence if you reoffend or fail to comply in any other way with the conditions of your licence. For your offence of cruelty to a child, I impose a sentence of 6 years and 9 months imprisonment to run concurrently with the sentence imposed on count 1 and with all other sentences. For your offence of perverting the course of justice, I impose a custodial sentence of 6 years and 9 months to run concurrently with the sentence imposed on count 1 and with all other sentences. For your offence of perjury in 2017, I impose a custodial sentence of 4 years to run concurrently with the sentence imposed on count 1 and with all other sentences. For your offence of perjury in 2018, I impose a custodial sentence of 3 years to run concurrently with the sentence imposed on count 1 and with all other sentences. In light of the sentence imposed on count 1, you will not benefit from the early release provisions which would otherwise apply to the sentence imposed on each of counts 2 to 5. Therefore, the total sentence which I impose is one of life imprisonment with a minimum term of 27 years and 321 days, taking account of the time which you have spent on remand. The prosecution contends that you have benefited substantially from your criminal conduct, from your wife's estate and the proceeds of certain life insurance policies. An order prohibiting disposal of assets was made by Guildford Crown Court on the 28th of February 2025. In due course, the prosecution will seek a confiscation order relating to such wealth as remains and represents realisable assets. In that connection, I have made agreed orders and directions under the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002. For that reason, no order is made at this stage for compensation or for payment and collection of a victim's surcharge. An order for forfeiture and destruction of the knife was made at an earlier stage. That is all.
So, to clarify, for the murder of Dawn Rhodes, 52-year-old Robert Rhodes was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 29 years and 6 months, which, taking into account time he spent on remand, meant that he would have to serve 27 years and 321 days from the date of the sentencing hearing before he can apply for parole. This puts the precise date when he'll be able to apply for release at the 3rd of December 2053, when he'll be 80 years old. I think his chances of release are minimal, even if he reaches this age. Rhodes will hopefully die forgotten and alone in prison. Separately, I want to highlight what the judge also said during her remarks, quote, "The many people whom you have affected by your selfish and self-centered actions are to be commended for their exceptional resilience and determination. In no one are those characteristics more remarkable than in Jack, to whose fortitude I also pay tribute. I express my hope that all those whose lives you have damaged will now feel able to focus on moving forward rather than on past events." I echo this sentiment. I have named this child Jack, and obviously their real name and gender has been withheld to give them anonymity, to enable them to have some distance away from these horrific events. However, regardless of this child's true identity, I think their exceptional bravery has to be highlighted. Having the bravery to speak to the police, knowing their father could kill again, and trying to do the right thing and save lives. Knowing that this would drag everything up again and condemn their own father to a lifetime inside. Also, having the courage to stand up in court to confront their father, despite Rhodes being too much of a coward to face them. Their actions show that this child is a far better person than this monster will ever be, and I hope they have a team of people around them reinforcing this every single day, helping them come to terms with the loss of both their mother and their father when they're still just a teenager. I pray they have a long and eventually happy life in peace. On this channel, I've tried to reinforce repeatedly how dangerous domestic abusers can be, but also how pathetic and self-centered they are. They see their partners as possessions, something they cling on to due to this chasm of emptiness inside of them. They don't love their partners. This requires some ability to put someone else first. They're utterly selfish people. I've also mentioned about the fact that children, who again these monsters really don't care about, become manipulative tools to get what the abuser wants. Robert Rhodes is the epitome of what I've been trying to illustrate. A man who wouldn't let his wife go, who planned her murder, but worse still, manipulated their child into helping him do it. He's the worst of the worst. He was willing to destroy a young child, his own child, to achieve his selfish need to continue to control a woman who clearly wanted nothing to do with him. As I mentioned, there are reports of Robert Rhodes being controlling, and I've no doubt this was the case. What he didn't just come out from nowhere. He'd been a manipulator for years. I've no doubt he monitored everywhere Dawn went and who she spoke to, tugged at her heartstrings to drag a dead marriage on for just a few more years because he was terrified of being alone. With regards to involving his child, I realised how unnecessary this was, and it suddenly struck me how this is a perfect example of how much of a coward this monster is. Specifically, Robert Rhodes no doubt could have set up his own wife to create a situation where he could kill her. Whilst this may have been easier if he involved Jack, I think he mainly dragged him into this so that he could justify his own actions. Let me explain. So Jack was upset and angry that his mother was not in the house anymore, and this was understandable. He was no doubt crying and screaming, saying he hated his mother, when in reality he deeply loved her and just wanted her back in his life. However, Rhodes fueled this, and when his son was saying that he despised his mother, I think in his twisted mind he used it as justification to murder Dawn. He was thinking, well, Jack hates her, so I'm fine to kill her. He agrees with me. She needs to die. This weak, pathetic man needed the input of a child who was under the age of 10 years old to get the bottle to commit his crimes. I know looks aren't everything, but I was struck by the fact that when Rose was arrested in 2024, when he was in his early 50s, he had dyed blonde hair. He looked like a childish, sad, pathetic man, and I think this just speaks to how inadequate he really is. I did mention about what the judge said at the end of her comments about a confiscation order, i.e. at some point in the future, the courts will try to recover the money Robert Rose received from his wife's death, including life insurance, etc. I think this was not his main reason for killing his wife. Unfortunately, it was the old, if I can't have her, no one else can. But I think realising he was set to receive hundreds of thousands of pounds likely heavily weighed on the scales, tipping him more towards committing the ultimate crime. So this piece of shit, because he couldn't accept his marriage was over, took his wife's life, ruined his own, but also, most sickeningly, deprived a young child of both parents, and left them with emotional scars that will likely never fully heal. Fuck you, Robert Rhodes. I hope you eventually burn in hell. So what are your thoughts on this case? If you like the content, then consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button. You can also send a one-off donation to support the channel via the thanks button. Please like, share and subscribe. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.